The last word in beauty, Egypt's brightest queen, the highest royal highness, the most serene. Helen's face launched ships, it's true, but Nefertiti's smile, her charm, her grace, her mystery still call across the Nile. What secret does her smile conceal with all its female art? Is this the final chapter? The last chance to take part?
Last call. Last call. Last call.
Last call for Nefertiti.
Last
Beauty
call.
like you've never known.
Last call.
Last call, she's got it all. Enigma, charisma. The higher that you build her up, the harder you will fall. In search of Nefertiti. Last call.
This is the last call for Nefertiti, the story of Nick Reeves's 4 seasons surveying the Valley of the Kings, conducting exploratory excavations to test the accepted wisdom that this most famous archaeological site is worked out. Many, even most Egyptologists, thought that Howard Carter was a fool for seeking the tomb of Tutankhamun, and post-1922 that the site was definitely worked out. Professional colleagues of Nick Reeves were also surprised when he was granted a concession to dig new ground in 1998. Most Egyptologists would have told you that there were no more tombs in the valley. They were wrong. This film consists of exposition and song. Epic tales have always been told through rhetoric and ballad, and in its own drawing room fashion, this is an epic story.
Oh, Chris, have you got the music playlist?
Yes, I have.
Yes.
We've been thinking about this. We've got quite a variety. We've written some, we've found some.
Yeah, researched very heavily.
We've got a song about Tutankhamun.
Oh yes, this was brilliant. We found it in an old song pamphlet from 1923, so it was obviously written just at the time of the finding of the tomb.
Called Old King Tut. Brilliant.
It's fantastic.
Brilliant.
There's another Tutankhamun song.
There's
as
another
well, isn't
Tutankhamun
there?
song
Yep.
we've written.
Yeah.
And nothing about me?
Actually, there is a song about you.
But we had to write it specially.
It's called
The Egyptologist.
Just for you.
Just
Nice.
Oh, and there's one in Collector's Serenade, an Egyptian band. Would you mind singing a couple of verses in there?
Of course not. Yeah.
That'd be
Okay.
good. Yeah, excellent.
a bit of variety.
Lovely. Oh, also about costumes. Have you thought about these?
Costumes, yes. What I was hoping to do is do something quite modern, something quite brash, I think. Sort of a tight white T-shirt, little slash across it, dim onto shoulder, that kind of look. Really more modern, more aggressive, I think.
Mercifully, the costumes have been made already, and he's
good.
wearing sepia tails.
Oh, right.
And I should be wearing something diaphanous and lovely with lots of pearls.
Yeah.
And a rakish headdress, I think, with a little dancey feather.
Really?
Lovely.
And as for me, I will be your guide. I will sing where necessary. I can tell you because I was there. Helping out, realising the dream. It all started in winter, here in Kent, in England, where Reeves directs a museum housed in a castle, bought by Dennis Bower to accommodate his collection, the last great collection of the common man. This was accumulated throughout the first half of the 20th century, not through wealth or advantage, but the intelligent application of credit. Bower's first collection of ancient Egyptian art was inspired by Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun. Here is a song that celebrates Bower's passionate endeavour. This is no ordinary love song, but a collector's serenade. Here are the trophies of his romance, each object lovingly displayed. Admire their fine facade of beauty, Each hides a secret only he can guess. This is no ordinary love song, but it's a love song nonetheless.
The wanting, the waiting, the anticipating, admiring, desiring, aspiring. Why I must look closer, caress it, touch it, possess it. I have to confess it. I'm lost like any lover in the essence, the story, the power, the glory, the mystery, the fire, the history entire. This is the collector's serenade.
I was invited to Chiddingston to come and look after the collections of the late Dennis Bower.
The passion for objects is much to do with the passion for saving those objects. Once removed from their creators, objects are orphaned. Removed again from their original intent or intended setting, they are homeless. Those who love objects seek to remedy this.
I suppose the thing that still draws me to Chiddingston is the eccentricity of the place and of the collector. The thing about Dennis Bower is that he was a romantic, a true romantic.
This is no ordinary love song,
The waiting, the
but a collector's serenade.
desiring, aspiring. Why I must look
Objects of desire, things he will acquire.
I have to confess it.
This is a different kind of love
The
song,
story, the power,
yet one
the
no
glory,
easier
the
to
mystery, the fire, the
express.
history
Call it no
entire.
ordinary
This is the
love
collector's
song.
serenade.
The passion for objects also has much to do with the archiving of the stories of the object. Every object carries a story, cracked and coloured by each twist and turn in its life, and collectors investigate every detail that they can unearth about their possessions.
His collections, these Egyptian collections, are inspired by the romance of Tutankhamun's discovery, Japanese collections by the romance of the samurai, and of course the Scottish and Stuart collections by the romance of Bonnie Prince Charlie.
We cannot all love objects or share in the passion for collecting. If you do, perhaps you are privy to all sorts of insights that elude the rest of us. However, we can all respect, perhaps even admire, another's passion.
It's a very odd place to start a dig from, but then again it's a very odd place.
The director of a collector's museum in Kent seems a world away from the Valley of the Kings. Not so, for although Reeves shares Dennis Bower's love of the Orient, he is an expert in the Amarna period of ancient Egypt's New Kingdom. It is this deep knowledge that led him to the Valley of the Kings.
I was asked for a day school to give 2 lectures, and being lazy I thought I'd choose 2 subjects which I'd already prepared. The first on Tutankhamun, the second on Tomb 55. And of course when it came to the day I couldn't find my lecture notes and I couldn't find any of my slides, and I had to start from scratch.
The study of ancient history is hard. In the absence of extensive written knowledge, ancient history, including Egyptology, is a matter of interpreting hard facts. So, it relies on archaeology for its evidence.
Looking at the subject again, the pieces fell into quite a different order and produced a quite different reading of the story than I'd followed previously. And I suppose it was one of those, how can I say, eureka moments.
To get a fuller understanding of Nick's ideas, I took time to read up some background. and the chance to ask him to explain further. Understanding the interpretations of others can be complex. This involved getting into the mind of an Egyptologist.
Some people say he's a man with a mission, others say he's a thing of the past. A man of mystery, he's living history, first and last.
The last great finding in the Valley of the Kings was the tomb of Tutankhamun. It's here, which was discovered by Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter in 1922. Since that time, people have tended to assume that the valley is worked out, that there's nothing left to find.
He won't admit he may never find his grail, though he spent his life in denial. He set his heart on Akhenaten in style.
Now, the Amarna Royal Tombs Project believe otherwise, basing its conclusions on a close study of Tutankhamun's tomb and the objects from it. Now, Tutankhamun's tomb poses something of a conundrum because it's generally assumed that there wasn't very much time to quarry the tomb, which is why it's so small. But if there wasn't much time to spend on preparing the burial, how come there's such a mass of spectacular golden funerary equipment? In fact, the answer turns out to be a fairly straightforward one.
Have you heard the one about the archaeologist?
His whole career's in ruins,
Haunted by the spectre of a tomb that may not even exist.
keep digging, come on, keep digging.
A close examination of the stuff that was found in Tutankhamun's tomb reveals that a pretty significant proportion of it was actually made for other people. That in fact, by the time Tutankhamun came to use it, it was second hand. I believe that this recycling occurred when the royal tomb at Amarna was abandoned and the occupants were transferred from Amarna to Thebes for reburial in the Valley of the Kings. I think it occurred at the time a burial was being prepared for Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun hadn't had time to prepare his own equipment. So what was transferred from Amarna was piled up. Tutankhamun took from this pile of burial equipment what he needed for his own purposes. And what was left over was then redistributed amongst the original owners.
Keep digging, come on, keep digging. Don't ask me if he's a fool or a dreamer or an out-and-out fantasist. He's on an E-trip, 'cause he's an Egyptologist. An Egyptologist. Egyptologist. Get the gist?
Now the implications of this new understanding, I suppose you could say, are really quite significant. For if the burial equipment was available, of these people was available for reburial at Thebes, then the chances are that their bodies were around as well. And if this is the case, then these burials still await discovery. To this pool of transferred equipment from Amarna seems to have been added the burial equipment prepared for Tutankhamun's predecessor, Smenkhare.
Have you heard what they say about the classicist?
It's such an old story.
Defines his art and makes his mark by finding an original twist.
Keep digging, come on, keep digging.
Why this is interesting is because Smenkhare seems to have been none other than Queen Nefertiti, Akhenaten's wife, in a later guise.
Keep digging, come on, keep digging. Don't ask me if he's a fool or a dreamer or an out-and-out fantasist. He's on an E-trip, 'cause he's an Egyptologist. An Egyptologist.
So, if Egyptology relies on archaeology for its evidence, then Nick's theory needed him to actually dig to back it up.
This is a theory I felt I had to test, and with the Valley of the Kings under threat from a clearance of the rubble fill, I put in an application to dig.
Egyptologist. Get the gist?
As I said at the start, I got involved, principally in the filming and the website, but in the end in all aspects of the organisation behind the dig.
Well, I don't know. I never want to be involved, but it's just involved.
Can you just go out and dig in the Valley of the Kings?
Well, you have to apply. We applied to the Egyptian government for permission. We had a project, we had a scheme of work, and we were given permission.
It must be incredibly exciting to go and dig there in the Valley of the Kings.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's the greatest archaeological site in the world. So, yeah,
and to add to all of our excitement in the first year was the sort of lateness of the permission coming through. I think we only had about a month to put it all together.
In a month? I mean, it doesn't give you long to get the finance together. I mean, it must cost a lot of money. How do you get that?
Well, we tried everything. We had fundraising events. We looked for individual sponsors. We looked for corporate sponsors.
Did you find a Lord Carnarvon?
We did, in fact, find a Lord Carnarvon, yes, a chap called Piers Litherland, who was very generous to us. But in the end, we opted for a broader base of support, which included several companies. And
included also the media angle, because the TV thing was important if we were filming, producing all this archive footage. And TBS in Japan had a very modern approach, which was also to sponsor the dig itself so that the work could continue.
And also he'd like to introduce me to the director of TBS, and who was luckily, he is an anthropologist, so he knew the work and he understood the work very well, and he was very, very helpful. He doesn't want to interfere our work, he just want to film that.
And we had sponsorship also in kind from a construction company called Kajima, and they gave us a bridge which enabled us to dig underneath the tourist paths for the first time.
Wow.
Well, in one point we think we need a bridge to dig up underneath the public footpath. So we went to Kajima office in Cairo, and luckily they're doing some Swiss bridge at that moment, and they agreed to help us to give some bits and pieces of the bridge.
It was all sort of putting together a partnership in different ways to help. I mean, we also needed help to actually get out there. Group travel, Egypt Air, Bales, these sorts of people were incredibly useful, particularly with a short notice.
Yeah, and in that respect, a very modern, up-to-date dig.
The character of the dig was moulded by its leader and the people who donated money, the members of the team and other vital partners. It took the efforts of all these people to get us into the air and bound for our destination, the Valley of the Kings, Luxor, Egypt.
You can't see round a corner, you can't look through a wall. You won't know when you've found her, but you're in her thrall. And even at a cul-de-sac, half deaf, half dumb, half blind, she's always, always on your mind. She's the spring in your step, the light in your eye, the beat, beat, beat of your heart, the heavenly jive that keeps you alive while tearing you apart. The ultimate yes, the final hello, the hope that carries you through. Nefertiti's calling, calling you. Last call.
Carnarvon stayed here as well, isn't it? Is that part of the reason why we stayed here?
Well, I have to admit, yes, there was a certain romantic attachment to staying here. And you know, when we first started, we had one short season in view. But after that, we decided, you know, we managed to negotiate a deal with the place, and we gave lectures in return for cheaper accommodation.
But it was also a good move on, you know, for the team as well, wasn't it? I mean,
well, it was extremely good. I mean, first of all, giving the lectures gave us an audience for our work. But also, you know, when you're employing a professional team, you know, they don't come cheap. You want them to be fit, happy and well and productive. And I think it's fair to say that ours was one of the happiest digs in Egypt at that time. Everybody worked hard and played hard. You know?
This is an historical song of the 1920s, Old King Tut.
Years ago,
in history we know,
King Tutankhamun ruled a mighty land. He ruled for many years,
mid laughter, song and tears.
He made a record that will always stand. They opened up his tomb the other day and jumped with glee. They learnt a lot of ancient history.
The find of Tutankhamun in 1922 is the greatest story in the history of archaeology, surely.
Yeah, it's the only intact royal tomb that's ever been found. And from one of the most fascinating periods of Egyptian history. So it's got everything, really.
And so exciting when that story first broke. The idea of men going off to a strange land and finding all this gold. And that beautiful funeral mask, which everybody around the world knows now.
But the other thing, this idea of the buccaneering spirit and the people going into the desert to seek for adventure and the passion, the romance. In Old King Tutankhamun's day, beneath the tropic skies, King Tut was very wise. Now Old King Tut was always gay. Cleopatra, she
sat upon his knee.
Pat, that's where she sat.
Very exciting. The sad thing is, it's for Egyptology itself, it's proved both a blessing and a curse because it's so completely corrupted people's expectations of what archaeology is all about.
But at least it means that they know about it now. I mean, there's not a child who doesn't know about Tutankhamun.
Tutankhamun was a boy king. He was born over 3,000 years ago. He has a tomb in the Valley of the Kings.
Now old King Tut was just a nut, as you can see. So proud was Tut of all his fine old ancestry.
1,000 girls would dance each day with lots of hip, hip, hip hooray. In Old King King Tut's day.
I mean, I don't want to be controversial really, but that for me is a bit outdated, the whole 20s thing. It's a bit retro.
Outdated in the same way that archaeology now is nothing at all like archaeology was like in the 1920s, or at least it shouldn't be.
I don't think you should see that as a fault. I mean, I think that is part of its charm, that it's kind of rooted in this lovely period where people twisted their pearls and drank champagne and cocktails by the pool.
Yeah, I mean,
we've got no problem with that.
No, it's a great tune. It's a bit outdated. It's a bit outdated, perhaps.
Well, yeah, for now.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but I feel that there's got to be a new song in this somewhere.
And here's how a song about Tut might have sounded in the early 90s.
There's a rumour in the reading room, a buzz in the bar. Well, get ready for a rising star from beyond the tomb. A blast from the past. Tutankhamun's coming and he's going to kick ass.
It's time the boy wonder got his reincarnation. Front his own TV show. Fight Tomb Raiders on PlayStation. He'd be sure to be recognised wherever his face went. He's cool, he's hot, he's fat man, hipper than a hip replacement. He's sex in a sarcophagus, a legend, a king. A wrapped up yummy mummy who's the daddy-o of bling. With a pedigree like his, you know he's gonna go far, man. The word on the streets will be Tutankhamun.
And that's not all. On the archaeology front as well, we had our completely new story to tell, which is why we brought along Paul Sussman, the writer, to help us with it.
Yeah, I mean, Paul was a sort of very picture of a sort of London journalist writer. I remember him at the hotel in his room, chain smoking. Ordering double espressos by the bucket load and
extraordinary
tapping away at his laptop.
Extraordinary job to do.
Monday, the 23rd of November. Today, I went up to the Valley of the Kings for the first time. Suddenly, the whole expedition seems very, very real. I've talked about it 100 times with Nick, chewing over his theories as to why he thinks there might possibly be a lost tomb in the valley. This afternoon, however, I finally saw it with my own eyes. I stood in front of the area we're going to be excavating and thought, this is it. This is what we've come here for.
I found myself in Egypt for the first time, part of a truly international team, with members from Egypt, Japan, the USA and Europe. It all seemed a world away from Chiddingstone and England.
If you can hear the motor in the background and the wailing of a radio, but I'm sitting on a small boat crossing the River Nile, going from the East Bank, where we're staying in the Winter Palace Hotel, over to the West Bank to visit the Valley of the Kings for the first time. I really am feeling very, very excited and also quite moved. I've been waiting for this moment for, well, most of the year now. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. I think I might walk all the way up to the valley. It's only about 4 or 5 miles. So I'm walking along the road from the West Bank of the River Nile and Western Luxor towards the Valley of the Kings. It's a very long, very straight road, and it's extremely hot, so I'm sweating like a pig, which seems to amuse all the Egyptian people who I pass. They obviously think I'm entirely insane to be walking around outside in this sort of heat at midday. What a beautiful place Egypt is. And the people are so friendly. Everybody smiles and waves at you. It's great, absolutely great. Having a whale of a time.
On Paul's first morning in Egypt, he enthusiastically set off to the valley on foot, while we watched in awe, and then passed him a few minutes later in a taxi.
Now, if you decide to walk rather than get a bus or a taxi, or as some tourists do, a donkey, you can take the adventurous and some might say insane route of climbing up a tiny little goat path which goes directly up over and through the hills and so comes down onto the Valley of the Kings from the top. As you can probably guess by the trudging of my feet on gravel and the way I'm puffing and blowing, I've decided to take the hard, adventurous and completely and utterly insane route. I'm completely exhausted, but my word, the views from up here are absolutely fantastic. I've never seen anything like it. I sincerely hope I don't pass out, however, before I get to the top. I really should have got into some fitness training before I came on this trip. Oh, God. I don't know if you heard that, but I've just gone face forward, flat down onto the ground.
It's hard to describe what is a long working day without mentioning the heat. Staying on the East Bank, it's up at 5:30 a.m, breakfast at 6, cross the river by boat by 7, and service taxi to the valley. That early in the day, it can be temperate. Sometimes you need to wear a fleece.
I tell you, there's some alarmingly steep drops up here. I hate heights. I get vertigo just sitting on my futon. And we're talking, you know, sort of 100-foot sheer drops straight down from the cliff tops where I am into the valley. I'm trying not to look, because if I do, I know I'm going to go all dizzy and fall over, and then I'll just be the latest dead body in the Valley of the Kings, which wouldn't be much fun.
I still felt a slight shiver down my spine, however, when I finally scrambled down onto the valley floor and stood in front of it for the first time. Who knows what might lie under all that rubble? Could there be a tomb down there, undiscovered for over 3,000 years?
We were digging in the main Valley of the Kings, the Eastern Valley of the Kings, where the tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered by Carter in 1922. Now, the Valley of the Kings was the principal cemetery of the kings of Egypt from around, 1500 to 1000 BC. Our concession in by 2002, extended from Tomb 55 right up here to beyond the tomb of Horemheb, and from Tutankhamun in the north to KV16 in the south. So the entire central section of the Valley of the Kings, which was of particular interest to us because the areas beneath the tourist footpaths have never been explored, never been investigated.
Some people say he's a man with a mission.
So we have a join now between Carter's plan and our plan. This hut. We started digging actually between the tomb of Tutankhamun and tomb KV56, which is popularly known as the Gold Tomb because it was excavated in 1908 and found to contain a treasure of 19th dynasty gold jewellery which had been deposited there at a later stage in its history. We were particularly interested in this area because from my work in the library it seemed to be one of the sites which had never been fully excavated. Carter had started working round from this way and stopped in 1922 when he found Tutankhamun.
A man of mystery. He's living history.
This was an area of particular interest to us because in the 1970s a chap called Lambert Dolphin, working for SRI International, had fired out some sonar shots in this direction from Tutankhamun's tomb to in the direction of KV56, and discovered two what he described as anomalies. These were features of some sort, subterranean features which couldn't be explained by the presence of already known tombs. So that was interesting.
The Valley of the Kings was not quite as I expected. All desolation is obscured by the need to make the tourists' visit safe and reasonably comfortable. It's clear, as soon as you walk up the wadi, that you are suspended some metres above the ancient floor of the valley. That somehow makes the surrounding mountainscape less imposing. And for a place that was once a holy resting place of pharaohs, it is now a shrine to secular pilgrimage. One of the most important, yet least heralded components of any dig are the Egyptian workmen. Day in, day out, from 7 in the morning and often until 5 in the afternoon, our men toil ceaselessly and without complaint. All are local, mostly in their late teens or early 20s, and often possess an innate understanding of the work. Some, like Abdelrahim the singer, and Mohammed Ibrahim the Strong, have become as much a part of the fabric of the dig as the archaeologists. Ahmed Abdelbasset has been the project's Rais, or foreman. His family has a long history in archaeology. His great-uncle was a basket carrier for Howard Carter back in the 1920s. We break at 10 for the men's breakfast, and then work through the heat of the early afternoon, which makes work tough and concentration almost impossible. It was fascinating to watch the team at work. Archaeology describes a cluster of familiar skills. The site must be surveyed like any construction site. The sorting and sifting of debris requires sharp eyes. Recording objects demands the skill of the draftsman and photographer. And the interpretation needs expert knowledge. From very early on, it was clear that Paul felt the draw of archaeology in Egypt. That he was a man who was moved by the history and at peace in the surroundings of the excavations. A man who would be touched by Egypt. We returned to the hotel at around 3 to shower and then record and analyse the day's findings. Later on, we meet in the bar.
Now, the history of excavations in the Valley of the Kings is a pretty sorry one, actually. There hasn't been very much in the way of scientific technique employed in the past, and with the result that the valley itself is considered today to be worked out, archaeologically exhausted, really. Now, one of the things I wanted to investigate was, just how much damage had been done in the valley and how much could possibly be salvaged from the mess. And so we started off from the beginning, approaching the subject from a scientific point of view. We wanted to do the work as carefully and as thoroughly and as scientifically as possible, so that I suppose the principle is the less information, the less evidence that survives, the more carefully the site has to be excavated. So this is the way we embarked upon the process.
Well, I think Davis didn't get this far. I think Davis got as far as that pit.
He may never find his grail.
Now, to our astonishment, as we started to excavate our first site, we discovered that the area had been touched upon. There'd been excavations around the cliff face, but as we moved towards the tourist path, we discovered that, in fact, the ground beneath was completely untouched. And it didn't take us very long to realise what had happened, that the tourist paths have always been out of bounds for excavators, because the Egyptian government has never wanted to prevent hundreds of thousands of tourists visiting. An excavation, of course, in the central areas and under the tourist paths would have stopped that. So what we discovered was that beneath the paths, the entire history of the Valley of the Kings, the entire archaeological history, was preserved intact.
He set his heart on
Underneath the paths, underneath all these untouched areas, is the information we need, the evidence we need to provide a context for all the badly excavated tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And this is something this is a major discovery. This is something we didn't expect. And it turns the Valley of the Kings, all these orphan tombs with no potential, turned overnight into tombs with a history.
We're trying to work out if this is an
Have you heard the one about the archaeologist?
What we also discovered was the Valley of the Kings, instead of descending gradually in a slope to the Wadi floor, descends in a series of steps. Now, most of the tombs that we know in the valley are located on the uppermost of these steps. Now, we've discovered that there is in fact a staircase going down, and Tutankhamun's tomb is located on the second of these steps, suggesting a very strong possibility that there's a whole layer of the Valley of the Kings which has never been investigated, which will, properly excavated, produce further tombs. Having established that the Valley of the Kings was substantially more intact archaeologically than we'd suspected, and the structure of it was rather more complex than I think anybody could have guessed, we decided to undertake a survey of our concession. Now, sonar had already been tried by the Americans and given interesting results which hadn't yet been proven, but we had the possibility of using radar. A Japanese specialist, Hirokatsu Watanabe, made himself available to us and offered to do a survey of our site, which we took him up on.
Come on, keep digging.
Again, to our astonishment, his initial survey revealed a number of interesting features, which looked at first glance as if they might well be undiscovered tombs.
We have our first find. Tiny piece of faience.
What about all the other things that you found on the dig?
Meters deep, scraps and fragments muddled in a heap, long lost treasures abandoned and asleep. It's so bizarre.
It's so bizarre.
Of course, during the course of our work, we uncovered many objects, thousands of fragments, some of which we were able to tie in with finds that had been made before.
The team's attention to detail has been extraordinary. Tiny flakes, corners of sarcophagi, and smoking pipes of previous explorers have all been saved, examined and stored, and all have a story to tell.
Glass jars, clay jars, trophies from the toil, pottery, lottery, excavator spoil, funny little bits and bobs all mingled with the soil. It's bizarre.
And not in Cairo.
We can't tell you all of those stories here, just offer an occasional tale.
But there must have been more to this story than just finding beautiful objects. I mean, a bit of human interest, maybe.
There wasn't a lot of time for diversions, but it was possible to introduce a few friends to the strangeness of the valley. Here's a song about Sophie's visit.
There's a man at the bar with a cheap cigar and a grin like the setting sun. With a glass of brandy in his hand, he's feeling randy and he's itching for a little fun. See the Winter Palace looks or dance floor rise and fall like the tide, while the barman stands with an ear on the band and a smile that's a mile wide. He's lascivious, she's oblivious to the wolf in the dinner suit, but the barman's sure he's seen it all before and his smile stays resolute. See the Winter Palace looks or dance floor flow like the River Nile, and he sneaks a glance at the pants of the dancers and ignores the barman's smile. She's dressed to impress, her hair is a mess, but the man doesn't even
even care. And he watches as she wiggles and she wriggles and she jiggles in a dress that's barely there. See the Winter Palace, Luxor dance floor, heave in the throbbing light. And the barman's sure the man's not gonna score, he'll be back tomorrow night.
Yeah, it's 56.
But any passion in the heat and dust was overwhelmed by the passion for the dust and what lay within it. Each day was an adventure for the archaeologists, beginning in hope, punctuated by delight, and ending in nervous expectation.
So, is there anything that you found on the dig that actually proves your theory?
Yes. Now, Mr. Watanabe, our Japanese radar specialist, surveyed our entire concession and discovered several interesting features. And we decided to investigate these systematically. And the first we excavated was situated just outside the tomb of Horemheb here. It turned out to be a natural crosswall, solid rock crosswall, which had been employed in antiquity as a natural security measure for this upper part of the Valley of the Kings. And we found at its base the remains of a hearth and wine jars and things like that, where the guard post had been established. We also discovered, cut into the rock face of this bluff, a little shrine around this size, which had been completely untouched since antiquity and still had in place a little painted limestone stela, which had been put there in around 1100 BC.
So, the radar's evidence seemed right. Perhaps its indication of further anomalies would lead us to Nefertiti.
Last call.
Last call for Nefertiti.
Last call.
Beauty like you've never known.
Last call.
Last call. She's got it all. Enigma, charisma. The higher that you build her up, the harder you will fall. In search of Nefertiti. Last call.
On the 29th of November 2000, at a depth of around 4 metres on Site 1, and to the immediate southeast of the KV-56 tomb shaft, ARTP uncovered its first significant object of Amarna date.
In fact, we found several fragments from the Amarna period, the most imposing of which was an ostracon, perhaps this size, with a figure of a standing official, his arms raised in adoration, depicted in the characteristic Amarna style, the sort of pot-bellied and shaven-headed and sunken-chested style, which was made popular by the pharaoh Akhenaten. This was located just outside tomb KV-56, close to which we'd also previously found several pieces of blue-painted pottery, which dated from the late Amarna period and came from very, very large storage jars, which are only found in tombs. We had a whole slew of objects from this area, which seemed to tie in with another Amarna piece, which we found actually within KV-56 as we excavated it. And that was a fragment of an alabaster canopic jar, of extraordinarily good quality alabaster, very, very high quality. And like the Tomb 55 canopic jars, most unusually, it had had the surface ground off. All the evidence seems to point towards this material having been thrown out in antiquity from KV-56 in order to accommodate the gold jewellery of the 19th dynasty. And when we looked more closely at the architecture of KV-56, the similarities in the cutting and the size of the chisels are so similar to the work in the tomb of Tutankhamun. I think without any doubt, KV-56 is one of the Amarna period tombs that we set out to find.
So if these finds suggest that KV-56 was an Amarna tomb? Could it have been that of the most beautiful woman of the ancient world?
Won't see her in her ritual robe, won't touch her golden shawl. The worst part, though it breaks your heart, you won't see her at all. Those famous brains now ground to dust, her startling beauty gone. But still she draws you on.
But more evidence from the radar has recently been tested.
I think most people watching this program will be familiar with the discovery which was made accidentally by Dr. Otto Schaden at the University of Memphis, digging just outside the tomb, KV-10, a new tomb of the Amarna period, KV-63, which contained a whole series of coffins and a whole series of jars containing refuse embalming materials. Now, this, of course, KV-63 was, of course, located in the very centre of our concession, and in fact it was a tomb that we found, that Mr. Watanabe found in 2000, and we had slated for future investigation. However, fate was against us, and we were not able to actually carry that that particular part of our work through to completion. But it's a very interesting tomb. KV-63, I think, is probably more important than people have so far recognised. It is, in fact, the KV-54 to the tomb of Tutankhamun, the embalming cache which signalled the existence of Tutankhamun's tomb. KV-63 signals the existence of another tomb. KV-63 contained the embalming debris of a much more interesting and important burial, which is still hidden close by.
The treasures of 63 point towards a much larger tomb close by, just as KV-54 led the way to Tutankhamun.
She is the spring in your step, the light in your eye, the beat, beat, beat of your heart, the heavenly jive that keeps you alive while tearing you apart. The ultimate yes, the final hello, the hope that carries you through. Nefertiti's calling, calling you.
Now, what's really interesting is that this bigger tomb, the more important tomb, the one which will answer the questions posed by KV-63. The location of this was also discovered by the Amarna Royal Tombs Project in 2000 and is an interesting prospect for the future. Here we have radar shots taken by Mr. Watanabe in 2000 showing the location, showing the position, showing the shape of KV-63, the vertical shaft. And here we have similar radar shots taken in another part of the valley showing the location of KV-64, the next tomb to be found in the Valley of the Kings.
I think this might really be the one. Nefertiti.
Last call.
Last call for Nefertiti.
Last call.
Beauty like you've never known.
Last call.
Last call, she's got it all. Enigma, charisma. In search of Nefertiti. In search of Nefertiti. In search of Nefertiti. Last call.
I've no doubt whatsoever that there are further tombs in the Valley of the Kings. We ourselves found evidence of several. But in a sense, that's not the point.
It's easy to get carried away when there's a tomb in your sights. But in the cool of the evening, you see the bigger picture. Our project is pledged not only to a broader understanding of the history and archaeology of the valley, but to the site's long-term survival also. tombs and their history need to be rescued. They are orphaned just as the objects discovered within. They need care, and those who love them passionately should be allowed to provide that care.
What the valley needs is not further cherry-picking of its more glamorous parts, but an overall strategy to study the valley as a whole.
On a dirty street in Luxor, where the dogs wear walking shoes and the air is thick with memories, where the houses huddle up like drunks for fear of falling down, and the whole street's an apology for the better side of town. I'm standing at the corner of the street we once called home, where we'd meet in that old restaurant, but I'll be there alone, where the band still wait to play your song, and the lineup's not changed for who knows how long. Nefertiti's on the bongos, Cleopatra's on the sax, and Ramesses II sits behind a silent bass. Imhotep's on the skins with his sticks in his hand, and Ptolemy's on piano to complete the Egyptian band. Your song echoes on in the silence, while the waiter idly clatters trays. As Ramesses adjusts his chair, Imhotep fiddles with his snare, and Ptolemy's avoiding my gaze.
Beneath the footpaths that has, by an absolute miracle, survived, archaeological evidence which will provide a context for those tombs which were excavated in the past very badly and have no history whatsoever. By careful and controlled excavation beneath the valley paths, in the parts of the archaeology that still survive, we can provide a context, we can provide a story for those tombs. And that really has to be archaeology's priority.
An excavation in the Valley of the Kings, seeking the tomb of Nefertiti, the definition of adventure. To have been there was remarkable, and all the time the music played in my head. Perhaps that's why epic tales inspire songs.
I'm at our usual table, where old thoughts rise up like ghosts, gaze across at emptiness and drink a silent toast, as the waiter checks the dogs in the street outside, and the band watch on through unseeing eyes.
Nefertiti's on the bongos, Cleopatra's on the sax, and Ramesses II sits behind a silent bass. Imhotep's on the skins with his sticks in his hand, and Ptolemy's on piano to complete the Egyptian band.
Tutankhamun's on the trumpet, the Sphinx is by the mic, King Khufu's on the slide trombone, but he won't play tonight. Imhotep's practiced all the licks and knows the riffs by heart, and Ptolemy's on piano, waiting for the door to open and the music to start.
This is obviously a huge task, but it's a task that needs to be tackled. And it's only going to happen if the archaeological community come together, act responsibly, and assist the Egyptians in the basic work that needs to be done. No more tomb hunting, no more cherry picking. Let's just do some archaeology.
So this is no longer just a search for Nefertiti. It's a search for what Nefertiti stands for. It's clear that all who are intrigued must support the Egyptians in their duty of care for this monument to their past. And so our story ends here, back at the castle, in the summer sun, where memories are being shared, and there's one more song to be sung.
But no gold?
Well, just a little gold.
And no beautiful things?
Well, I suppose the promise of beauty.
You must be disappointed?
Well, not really. We went in search of a single tomb and came back with a whole valley to rescue.
A search and rescue mission?
Yeah. And it's only just beginning, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been an odd place to start a dig from, but then again, it's been an odd dig.
And did you like the songs?
Loved them. Well, another one about the Academy.
No one's ever been quite fair to the pharaohs.
They really shouldn't have to take the blame.
There's been stories through the centuries.
Now there's shoddy documentaries with media tarts all acting parts in some researcher's far-fetched claim.
So add computer graphics and the public will applaud.
Add some sex and sound effects and wait for the award.
Oh.
You shouldn't have.
No one's ever been quite fair to the pharaohs.
Even pyramid schemes have got a shameful name.
So pluck a theory out of air.
Imagination's de rigueur.
Oh, no one's ever been quite fair to the pharaohs.
The pharaohs simply did their job with all their main and might. If you're a tyrant, then you must tirade. We've watched the films, we've read the books, we've seen their names in lights, but they never got a penny when Spielberg bought the rights.
No one's ever been quite fair to the pharaohs. Is this the silent mummy's final curse? Your chosen place of rest becomes an open treasure chest. The things you prized all analysed with an interest bordering on perverse.
And all those lies about your life, it's like a hideous dream.
And you're so tightly bandaged, no one even hears you scream. Ah!
No one's ever been quite fair to the pharaohs. It seems things couldn't possibly get worse. So as we strip their history bare,
Oh, spare a universal prayer. Oh, no one's ever been.
No one's ever been.
No one's ever been.
No one's ever been quite fair to the pharaohs. No one's ever been quite fair to the pharaohs.